This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Rinkitink in Oz by L. Frank Baum. Chapter 12. The Excitement of Bilbil the Goat. Our story must now return to one of our characters whom we have been forced to neglect. The temper of Bilbil the Goat was not sweet under any circumstances, and whenever he had a grievance he was inclined to be quite grumpy. So, when his master settled down in the palace of King Gos for a quiet life with the boy prince, and passed his time in playing checkers and eating and otherwise enjoying himself, he had no use whatever for Bilbil, and shut the goat in an upstairs room to prevent his wandering through the city and quarreling with the citizens. But this Bilbil did not like at all. He became very cross and disagreeable at being left alone, and he did not speak nicely to the servants who came to bring him food. Therefore, those people decided not to wait upon him any more, resenting his conversation and not liking to be scolded by a lean, scraggly goat, even though it belonged to a conqueror. The servants kept away from the room, and Bilbil grew more hungry and more angry every hour. He tried to eat the rugs and ornaments, but found them not at all nourishing. There was no grass to be had unless he escaped from the palace. When Queen Cor came to capture Inga and Rinkitink, both the prisoners were so filled with despair at their own misfortune that they gave no thought whatever to the goat, who was left in his room. Nor did Bilbil know anything of the changed fortunes of his comrades until he heard shouts and boisterous laughter in the courtyard below. Looking out of a window with the intention of rebuking those who dared thus to disturb him, Bilbil saw the courtyard quite filled with warriors, and knew from this that the palace had in some way again fallen into the hands of the enemy. Now, although Bilbil was often exceedingly disagreeable to King Rinkitink as well as to the prince, and sometimes used harsh words in addressing them, he was intelligent enough to know them to be his friends, and to know that King Gos and his people were his foes. In sudden anger provoked by the sight of the warriors and the knowledge that he was in the power of the dangerous men of Regos, Bilbil butted his head against the door of his room and burst it open. Then he ran to the head of the staircase and saw King Gos coming up the stairs, followed by a long line of his chief captains and warriors. The goat lowered his head, trembling with rage and excitement, and just as the king reached the top stair, the animal dashed forward and butted his majesty so fiercely that the big and powerful king, who did not expect an attack, doubled up and tumbled backward. His great weight knocked over the man just behind him, and he in turn struck the next warrior and upset him, so that in an instant the whole line of Bilbil's foes was tumbling heels over head to the bottom of the stairs, where they piled up in a heap, struggling and shouting, and in the mix-up hitting one another with their fists until every man of them was bruised and sore. Finally, King Gos scrambled out of the heap and rushed up the stairs again, very angry indeed. Bilbil was ready for him, and a second time butted the king down the stairs. But now the goat also lost his balance and followed the king, landing full upon the confused heap of soldiers. Then he kicked out so viciously with his heels that he soon freed himself and dashed out of the doorway of the palace. "Stop him!" cried King Gos, running after. But the goat was now so wild and excited that it was not safe for anyone to stand in his way. None of the men were armed, and when one or two tried to head off the goat, Bilbil sent them sprawling upon the ground. Most of the warriors, however, were wise enough not to attempt to interfere with his flight. Coursing down the street, Bilbil found himself approaching the bridge of boats, and without pausing to think where it might lead him, he crossed over and proceeded on his way. A few moments later, a great stone building blocked his path. It was the palace of Queen Cor, and seeing the gates of the courtyard standing wide open, Bilbil rushed through them without slackening his speed. End of chapter 12.